In this podcast, we hear from a number of clinicians and researchers at Addenbrooke's and across the Cambridge Biomedical campus about the extraordinary experience of running multiple life-saving research programs during the pandemic. We hear about the incredible collaboration across NHS trusts, the University of Cambridge, and NIHR, the bravery of staff and patients who took part, and the enormous challenge of setting up research programs as a global pandemic unfolded.
So last year brought huge uncertainty. We had a virus that we didn't know what it was going to cause. We didn't know how to treat it. And at the beginning of the year, we didn't know how we were going to get out of having a worldwide pandemic. And so suddenly research became absolutely central to how we survived. Trying to recruit as many patients as we could across the NHS and the world into research studies so we could understand what on earth was happening, what were the consequences of the virus, what was it going to do to our patients in the shorter term and the longer term, what did it mean to society, developing vaccines, looking for treatments. All of those kind of things became ever more important than they had been before. I think one of the brilliant things about working at somewhere like CUH is that we delivered in spades in trying to engage with all of that. Everybody across the organisation knew that research was the exit strategy for how we got through the pandemic. So certainly from critical care, almost every single patient we had to a critical care bed at CUH was recruited into an observational study so we could understand what was happening with the disease, but also an interventional trial of a therapy. And in addition to that, tens, if not hundreds, of our staff signed up for vaccine trials and participation in those, as well as screening projects and any other way in which we could engage in research. It was amazing, and it provided some hope in what were some very dark times for me. In April last year, I never, ever imagined that we would have therapies that reduce mortality for critically ill patients and vaccines that work. I mean, that we could do that in under 12 months is phenomenal. It's never been done before, and really is just amazing.
I remember that, in fact, Anne will remember the first few patients that we consented in the hospital. And it's really easy to forget it, but it was quite scary back then. And it was particularly scary because, unlike in your clinical duties, and I did work in ICU in Papworth, and I did some shifts in Addenbrooke's as well in the Red Wards. This was a patient contact that you didn't need to have for patient care. So you had to really buy into the idea that research genuinely was important, because you were exposing yourself to that additional risk by going in, taking blood, doing consent, whatever that patient contact was. And I remember some of the discussions we had, and they seem funny looking back, but we spent hours and hours debating about what you do with the consent form. Do we leave the consent form in the room? Do we
double bag? Yeah.
Photocopy? Do we have to wipe the photocopier and isolate it for, And a lot of these decisions, and a lot of these things are now routine and part of our everyday life, but they were every single one of those was a new challenge, and that was on top of the fear of exposing yourself and bringing that risk back to your family, and so I think you really had to deep in your bones believe the research was important.
We asked for volunteers when we initially started recruiting for the wards, and some very brave and I don't use that term lightly, put themselves forward and said, well, actually, I'm prepared to go. We're not sure what's happening, but I'm going to go into the red wards and consent these patients and take bloods and take all the following samples.
And so some people just stood up and led, and maybe they led in a kind of, act first, think later way, but it gave the rest of staff confidence that when you see someone do something and then nothing bad happens.
We were, Charlotte, you said very clearly, look, research is the way out of this. And you had some staff, some team members who were just jumping in and cracking on, others you were working with, and it's not trivial what you were asking people to do. Did some of the early research success give people energy and a sense of, come on, this is really working? And maybe it's just me, but lots of the things I try sort of end in sort of splatter armor failure against brick walls. I'm sure all research is successful, but how did you handle the success and failure and the energy and the momentum?
I think the key early event for everybody, where those that might have sat on the fence or those that maybe weren't convinced, was the recovery trials dexamethasone reporting, because looking back in an astonishingly short frame of time, we'd gone from no concept of whether you could even recruit patients in a pandemic. That was a genuine question at the start. Could we actually do this? You know, was the NHS just going to be overwhelmed? And you know, could we even spare the staff? And is it physically, you know, is it just too stressful to do this in this scenario and too quick? To actually, here we've got a therapy and it's gonna save lives, and it happened in a matter of weeks.
I think it was even more than that. Actually, when that arm went into the recovery trial, a large number of people said it shouldn't happen. This is dangerous.
I agree with that. That was the astonishing power of research, wasn't it? Showing that something which half the medical profession was saying is a dangerous treatment actually reduces mortality by 30%.
Yep. So it wasn't just we found something that works, we found that almost everybody was wrong. Yep. And the thing that people had said we shouldn't do was the thing that worked. And that was a very powerful finding within 100 days of starting the trial.
We are quite a big team of around 45 nurses. So we are clinical nurses, but we do have the extra research skills. So while some were redeployed in the ward, we still had to run the never stop trials, the trials that were still beneficial for the patients. Because we are involved with a lot of different fields. So we had the oncology going on, endoscopy going on, and all those patients, we could just not stop the research saying, look, now there's something happening. We can't look after you anymore. So while part of the team were involved with COVID, we were just trying to keep the other safe, the patient to come in a safe environment.
So our team have literally been across the board. So obviously starting with the Samba testing that our team validated and got up and running. And then that was crucial, the 90-minute testing. You know, so Vivian Mendoza led that. And we got that through the point of care very, very quickly. And then obviously looking at all the platform trials, we were literally across the board working 24/7 on the wards, giving infusions. And then obviously vaccine. Our team have been involved in all the vaccine, AstraZeneca, and now COVID boost, but also being involved in the long COVID clinic. So I established that along with Miles and Charlotte, sorry, it's because you're here, Rowan Bernstein. So we set up that on behalf of the trust, and that was fantastic because actually then we had a captured audience, for want of a better word. So people were coming in for long COVID, and then while they were here, we were enrolling them in research trials. So one of the research trials which has been huge for us is the Cambridge Bioresource COVID study. And we have recruited hundreds of patients. So every patient that came in with COVID, I was triaging them 24/7, literally 24/7, looking at A&E, looking at all the wards, checking who could be enrolled in research. One thing I do want to say is the collaboration between the CUH, the university, and ourselves has been astonishing. And I do want to say there were, like Jane, Mark brought out, but there was someone that came from patient safety. So that's where her regular job was, but she was a nurse and hadn't nursed for a while. Came on board, went to the red wards, and was with us every day. I mean, it's been a privilege working with Miles as well for the NIHR, has been an absolute privilege.
That collaboration was so central, wasn't it, in the Cambridge community?
Definitely, and getting our research out there. I mean, a lot of nurses didn't know we existed, even though obviously we're a research trust. You know, the bums on seats who are literally with the patient, you know, wouldn't know we existed. So actually us going to the red wards, you know, speaking to the staff on a daily basis, that's waved the flag for research.
I guess there's a couple of comments I'd like to make. One is really just to thank the staff because they have been tremendous. We've heard about how they've contributed, but at the same time, over 6,000 of our staff signed up to research. So we've learned a lot about how this has affected the healthcare workforce, developed screening programs, this sort of thing. And the other is the power that's been realized of the biomedical campus. Some years ago, somebody had the 2020 vision to build Europe's largest biomedical campus around the hospital. And that's really allowed us to do the sort of work that people like Ken Smith and Ravi Gupta have led on immune responses, vaccine responses. So I think we really are realizing what people have built over many years, actually, in terms of our ability to deliver research.
That's terrific, John. And I think I remember having a conversation with you and Patrick Maxwell, and in my mind it was sort of February, March time, somewhere on that chart. And I said, so very naively, I said, so what are we all going to do? And I think you and Patrick on the call said something along the lines of, well, look, we're shutting down quite a lot of our existing studies or cooling them. And on Monday, there's going to be a lot of very capable, driven, motivated people feeling a little bit bored. And I'm sure that they'll find things to occupy themselves. How did and then the next thing I knew, we had 200 research programs. How did all of that happen? Did you just step back and let it go?
Well, it's the people we've heard from that have really driven that. Mark, Charlotte, and but many others as well. And I think Mark touched on the willingness of people to give up their own research program and also and then do anything to support the research effort. So Mark managed to persuade people who were running quite powerful research studies to become porters and ferry samples across the campus. Again, in an environment where we weren't really sure what we should be doing with these samples, how infectious they were at the beginning. It really was a remarkable effort across the whole campus, actually. Well, I think the underpinning platform or platforms are things like the bioresource, where you've got people signed up and the willingness of patients and the public to take part in research. Put that in the middle of the biomedical campus, and really you've got a very powerful environment and tool to deliver the outputs.
You know, I'm a big enthusiast and advocate for the idea that for every patient who walks through the door of CUH, there should be a research project that we engage them with. But those things don't just happen, of course. They require networks of engaged clinicians and nurses and everybody pulling in the same direction. And they very definitely require leadership at ground level to make those things happen. And we've seen that through the COVID pandemic. We've definitely experienced that, and it's been to everybody's credit that this was delivered. But we need to try and bottle that and make sure that we sustain those networks in the years ahead, and we maintain the enthusiasm for doing research and this sort of broader picture, because hopefully as COVID recedes into memory, all the other healthcare problems that we deal with day to day will start cropping up again and will remain major burdens on humankind. And Cambridge, of course, is in a unique position to be able to shed some light on these things and tackle them. So let's all pull towards that goal as well, and use the experiences of COVID, dreadful though it's been, to hopefully allow us to do better things in the broader sphere of medical health science in the years ahead, I think.
I mean, wow, what an extraordinary, tour de force, I think, ranging from the fear that our colleagues working in research and in our clinical areas felt, the same that many of us did. But the way that people were able to work out how to support people through that, to make sure that research was was front and center. And Charlotte, your comments around, look, research is the way out of this. And I thought it was interesting hearing the things that people thought weren't going to work that then did. But it's a sort of very human story right the way through to these are the things that are going to solve the problems. And Dorothy, I think also hearing at the same time we had other patients and other colleagues in trials that we had to keep going. So I think very powerful. And I think, Miles, then to hear what the future looks like for us, I think is a very powerful rallying cry.